My human's name is Jake. He thinks he's the one who protects our little town, tucked away here in the quiet of the Blue Spine Mountains. He's the one with the badge, the one who carries the weight of everyone's safety on his shoulders. But on the day the first winter storm tried to swallow him whole, I had to remind him who really protects whom. I am Scout, and this is my story. It's a story about loyalty and a love so deep it can fight off the coldest darkness. But what he doesn't know, what no one knows, is that the real monster wasn't the storm. It was the one watching us from between the trees. Stay with me, and I will show you the dark truth he almost died to uncover. My human's name is Jake. He thinks he's the one who protects our little town, tucked away here in the quiet of the Blue Spine Mountains. He's the one with the badge, the one who carries the weight of everyone's safety on his shoulders. But on the day the first winter storm tried to swallow him whole, I had to remind him who really protects whom. I am Scout, and this is my story. It's a story about loyalty and a love so deep it can fight off the coldest darkness. But what he doesn't know, what no one knows, is that the real monster wasn't the storm. It was the one watching us from between the trees. Stay with me, and I will show you the dark truth he almost died to uncover. Before the cold came, before the forest itself seemed to hold its breath in fear, there was a promise. It lived in the quiet moments that stitched our lives together, a thread of understanding woven so tightly that words were never necessary. Our days always began the same way, not with an alarm clock, but with the first pale light of dawn, painting the peaks of the mountains a soft, hazy blue. I would hear the shift of his weight in the old bed, the quiet groan of the floorboards that had held his family's secrets for generations. Then came the sounds that were the music of my morning, the scrape of the coffee grinder, a sound that promised warmth was coming, the rush of water into the kettle, the clink of his favorite ceramic mug, the one with a chip on the rim. He never rushed. His movements were slow, deliberate, and sometimes a little heavy. I would lie on the worn rug by the fireplace, my head on my paws, watching him. I learned everything I needed to know about his state of mind in those first few moments of the day. A quick, sharp movement meant he was focused, a case on his mind. A slow, almost tired gesture meant the quiet sadness was visiting him again. On those days, the heavy days, my tail wouldn't wag. I would just watch, my amber eyes following him, letting him know he wasn't alone in his silence. He would pour his coffee, the steam curling up into the cool air of the cabin, and his eyes would meet mine across the room. He wouldn't say anything. He would just give a small, almost imperceptible nod, and I would understand. It was our pact, our silent promise. I am here. You are not alone. After his coffee, he'd pull on his worn leather boots, the ones that smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and him. That was my signal. A soft thump of my tail on the floor would be the only sound as I rose to my feet, ready. Our partnership was the most natural thing in the world. It simply was. The drive in his old pickup truck was my favorite part of the day. The truck was an extension of him. It rattled and groaned, but it was strong and dependable, just like the man who drove it. I didn't ride in the back. I sat in the passenger seat, my rightful place. My head would often rest on the center console, close enough to feel the warmth of his hand if he reached over. We would drive the winding mountain roads, the towering pines standing like ancient sentinels on either side. Jake loved these mountains, but they also held his pain. I didn't understand the human concept of loss, not really. I didn't know the story behind the faded photograph of the smiling woman tucked into the truck's sun visor, but I could feel it. It was a cold spot in his heart that even the truck's heater couldn't reach. It was a scent that only I seemed to notice, a faint, lingering aroma of sorrow that clung to him like the mountain mist. On the days when that scent was strongest, I would push my head gently against his arm. I wouldn't whine or demand attention. It was just a simple physical reminder. I am here. He would respond by resting his hand on my head, his fingers stroking my fur, his thumb rubbing just behind my ear. We would drive like that for miles, the only sounds being the rumble of the engine and the wind whispering through the gaps in the windows. He never had to tell me he was hurting. I already knew, and he never had to thank me for staying close. He knew I always would. That was the promise. Our life was a rhythm, a steady beat like a slow, strong heart. Morning coffee, the truck ride, the patrol, the quiet evenings by the fire. It was a good life, a life built on a foundation of mutual trust and unspoken affection. But even the steadiest rhythm can be broken. The change came subtly at first. It was in the air when we drove through town. The usual friendly waves seemed a little more subdued. The conversations at the general store would stop abruptly when Jake's truck rumbled past. The town was holding a secret, a shared worry that settled like a fog in the hollows. The name they whispered was Clara Vance. I knew Clara. She was a kind woman with laughter in her eyes and the scent of old books and cinnamon on her clothes. She was a local historian, always digging into the past, trying to uncover the stories the mountains had tried to forget. She loved to tell Jake that the Blue Spine Mountains kept receipts on every soul who had ever wronged them. She always had a gentle word for me, and sometimes a piece of jerky hidden in her pocket. Then one day she was just gone. The search parties had combed the woods for a week, finding nothing. The town's worry grew into a quiet, gnawing fear. For Jake, it wasn't just another case. It was personal. Clara was a friend. Her disappearance was a rock thrown into the still pond of our community, and the ripples were touching everyone. The quiet sadness that usually visited Jake now became a permanent resident. His jaw was always tight, his movements were sharp again, but this time it wasn't focus. It was frustration. It was anger. He pushed himself harder than ever before, taking extra patrols, driving deeper into the labyrinth of old logging roads that snaked through the mountains. He was searching for answers, for a clue, for anything that would tell him what had happened to the woman with the kind eyes. I was with him every step of the way, my senses on high alert, trying to pierce through the veil of silence the forest had drawn around her. I could feel his determination, a burning fire inside him, and my silent promise to him expanded. It wasn't just about being there for his sadness anymore. It was about protecting him from the darkness he was so determined to confront. It was a bond forged not in words, but in shared silence, in knowing glances, and in the steady, reassuring presence of another soul in the vast, lonely wilderness. True connection doesn't need a sound to be heard, and it was that silent connection, that unspoken promise, that would soon be tested by a scream we couldn't hear, and a fall that threatened to break everything we were. Have you ever felt a connection with an animal that went beyond words? A silent understanding that felt deeper than any conversation? Share that feeling below. The mountains always talk to those who listen. That day they were screaming. It began as a subtle shift, a change in the tenor of the wind as it combed through the high pines. The air, which usually tasted of clean, cold stone and damp earth, now carried a metallic tang, a scent like old blood and new fear. Jake didn't seem to notice. His focus was a sharp, narrow beam, pointed directly at the task ahead. His jaw was set, and the quiet sadness in his eyes had been replaced by a hard, determined glint. He was a hunter now, and he was hunting for a ghost. Our destination was a trail known as Briarwood Trace, a rugged, unforgiving path that was rarely used by anyone but the most seasoned hikers and the occasional forest ranger. It was the last place anyone had reported seeing Clara Vance. The old truck groaned in protest as Jake pushed it up the steep, rutted access road. The trees grew thicker here, their branches interlocking overhead, casting the path in a permanent, gloomy twilight. The usual chatter of squirrels and the cheerful songs of mountain chickadees were gone. The forest was holding its breath. When Jake finally parked the truck and killed the engine, the silence that rushed in was heavy, suffocating. It wasn't peaceful, it was watchful. I didn't want to get out. Every instinct, every fiber of my being, screamed at me to stay inside the metal shell of the truck. I whined low in my throat, a sound I rarely made. "Easy, Scout," Jake murmured, his voice tight. "It's just a trail. We've done this 100 times." But it wasn't just a trail. He clipped the long leash onto my collar, and I resisted, planting my paws firmly on the truck's floor. My reluctance wasn't defiance. It was a desperate, silent plea. "Don't go. Something is wrong here." He gave a gentle but firm tug. "Come on, boy. We have to look." His duty was a force stronger than my fear, so I obeyed. I leaped from the truck, my paws landing on the cold, damp ground, and the feeling of wrongness intensified. The hair along my spine, my ruff, stood on end. We started down the trail, Jake moving with the focused economy of a trained officer, his eyes scanning every rock, every fallen log. My head was down, my nose working overtime, trying to decipher the tapestry of scents. There was the familiar musk of a fox that had passed hours earlier, the sharp scent of crushed pine needles under Jake's boots, and the sweet, cloying smell of decay from a damp log. But underneath it all was that other scent, the scent of human fear, sharp and acrid. It was Clara's scent, but it was twisted, curdled with terror. And it was mixed with something else, something predatory and cold, a scent that didn't belong to any animal I knew. It was the smell of a human who enjoys causing fear. My body grew tense, my stride shortening. I kept glancing back at Jake, trying to communicate my unease, but he was lost in his own world of visual cues and logical deductions. My feelings, my instincts, were just noise to him in that moment. He was looking for evidence a human could see, a footprint, a piece of fabric. I was trying to warn him of a danger a human could not see, but could only feel. I pulled him toward a dense thicket of rhododendron, the broad, waxy leaves creating a dark, uninviting tunnel. The wrong scent was stronger here. Jake hesitated, then followed my lead, pushing the branches aside, and that's when we saw it. It wasn't a note. It was something far more personal, far more cruel. It was Clara's scarf, the vibrant red one she always wore, a slash of defiant color against the muted tones of the mountains. It wasn't snagged on a branch as if by accident. It was tied there, knotted tightly around the limb of a birch tree, at eye level, flapping gently in the cold breeze. It was a flag, a trophy, a deliberate, chilling message. The air rushed out of Jake's lungs. I felt his hand, the one holding my leash, clench into a white-knuckled fist. The scent of his own adrenaline, sharp and sudden, flooded the air around us. In that instant, he was no longer a police officer working a missing persons case. He was a man staring at proof that his friend had not simply gotten lost. She had been taken. She had been hunted. And the person who did it wanted him to know. They had left this here for him, for us. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a taunt. He stood frozen for a long moment, his gaze locked on the piece of red fabric. The forest was silent, watching us, watching him. He finally raised his hand and spoke into the radio clipped to his shoulder, his voice strained, unnaturally calm. "Dispatch, this is Riley. I have a significant piece of evidence at my location on Briarwood Trace. I need a forensics team. Mark my coordinates." After the call, he didn't move. He just stared. And as he stood there, the feeling of being watched intensified until it was a physical pressure against my skin. I turned away from the scarf and stared directly into the deep, dark woods behind us. My body was a rigid line of tension. I didn't bark. A bark would have been a release. Instead, a low, guttural growl rumbled in my chest, a sound that came from a place of pure, primal warning. "We see you." Jake must have felt it too. His hand moved from his radio and rested on the cold metal of his sidearm. He slowly scanned the trees, his eyes missing nothing, yet seeing nothing. The woods remained still, offering no sign of life, but the feeling was undeniable. We were trespassers here, and the owner of this place was not welcoming. The silence was the most terrifying part. It was the silence of a predator holding perfectly still, waiting for its prey to make a mistake. "Okay, boy," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. "Let's back out. Slowly. We wait for the team." He took a step backward, pulling gently on my leash, and another. The tension seemed to lessen with every step we took away from that terrible red flag, away from the darkness under the rhododendrons. A false sense of relief began to settle in. We were leaving. We were going back to the truck, back to safety. We had found the warning, and now we were heeding it. But the mountain had other plans, or perhaps the one watching us did. We were navigating a narrow, steep section of the trail where wet leaves and moss covered the treacherous rocks. Jake was focused on the path ahead, his mind already racing, planning the next steps of the investigation. He was no longer thinking about the immediate danger. That was his mistake. It happened in the blink of an eye. One moment, his boot was planted firmly. The next, it slid out from under him on a patch of black ice, a hidden treachery concealed by the fallen leaves. There was no time for a shout. There was only a sharp, surprised gasp. His arms flailed, his body twisting in the air, as his full weight pitched forward over the edge of the trail. The leash was ripped from his hand. I heard the sickening sound of branches snapping like bones, the violent explosion of snow and dirt, and then a final, hollow thud as his body hit the rocks in the ravine below. And then, silence. A silence so profound, so absolute, it felt like the world had ended. The wind stopped. The birds were silent. The forest just watched, impassive. My heart hammered against my ribs. I raced to the edge, my nails scrabbling for purchase on the icy rock, and peered down. He was there, a broken shape half buried in the snow, twisted at an unnatural angle. A dark stain was already spreading from his head, melting the pure white snow a terrifying shade of crimson. His radio crackled once, a final, dying hiss, and then it too went silent. I barked, a frantic, desperate sound that the woods swallowed without an echo. I barked again and again, my voice raw with terror and disbelief. But there was no response. Nothing. Just the still, broken form of my human, my partner, my entire world. Fear is a scent, and that day the forest was soaked in it, a cold, sharp perfume of dread that clung to every tree and every stone. Sometimes the greatest dangers are the ones we refuse to see, the gut feelings we dismiss as just the win. As my human's world went dark, my duty had just begun. Describe a time you ignored a gut feeling, a sense that something was wrong, that you wish you hadn't. What was the outcome? Darkness fell. The cold, which had only been a whisper, now began to roar. It came to claim him. I had only one thing to say, not today. Panic is a useless, frantic energy. My first barks were pure panic, echoing unanswered in the suffocating silence. But as the last echo died, something older and deeper took over. A purpose. I could not save him from the top of the ravine. I had to go to him. There was no clear path, only a steep, treacherous slope of rock and ice. I didn't hesitate. I half ran, half slid down the incline. Loose stones and snow cascading around me. A sharp edge of shale sliced into the pad of my front paw, and a hot, searing pain shot up my leg. I yelped once, a sharp cry of pain, but I didn't stop. The pain was distant, unimportant. All that mattered was the still, broken figure at the bottom. I reached his side, my breath coming in ragged, steaming clouds. The metallic scent of his blood was thick in the air, a terrifying perfume that made my stomach churn. I nudged his hand with my wet nose. It was limp and frighteningly cold. I pushed harder, then licked his face, trying to wake him the way I sometimes did in the morning. Nothing. I whimpered, a low, heartbroken sound that was swallowed by the immense, indifferent quiet of the woods. I put my head against his chest, my ear pressed against the thick fabric of his jacket, listening, praying. For a terrifying second, there was nothing. Just silence. My own heart seemed to stop. And then, I felt it. A faint, shallow flutter. A tiny, almost imperceptible rise and fall. He was breathing. He was alive. That single weak movement changed everything. The panic vanished, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. He was alive, and my job was to keep him that way. The sun, which had been a weak, watery disk in the sky, finally surrendered and bled out behind the western peaks. With its departure, the temperature plummeted. The wind picked up, no longer whispering, but howling through the trees, carrying with it the first snowflakes of the storm. They were small and delicate at first, melting on my fur. But soon they grew larger, heavier, coming down in a thick, swirling curtain of white that erased the world around us. We were alone, trapped in a snow globe of gathering doom. The cold was a physical entity, a predator stalking us. I could feel it seeping into Jake's body, stealing his warmth, his life. I knew with a certainty that came from a place deeper than thought what I had to do. I carefully, gently climbed onto his torso, positioning my body to cover as much of him as I could. I was a living shield against the wind, a breathing blanket against the snow. I curled into a tight ball, tucking my nose under my tail, trying to preserve every bit of my own warmth so I could share it. The hours began to blur into one long, frozen moment. The snow kept falling, the wind kept howling, and still, he did not move. I could feel the cold of his body through my fur, a deep, penetrating chill that made me shiver despite myself. My own body worked harder, my heart beating a steady rhythm, a furnace burning fuel I didn't have, all in a desperate attempt to fight back the encroaching ice. The pain in my paw was a dull, throbbing ache now, a constant, unwanted companion in the darkness. But I ignored it. It was just another part of the storm. Sometime deep in the night, a new scent cut through the sterile cold of the snow. It was wild and hungry. I lifted my head, my ears swiveling, my nostrils flaring. A pair of coyotes, drawn by the smell of blood. I saw them then, at the edge of the ravine, two pairs of hungry yellow eyes glowing in the oppressive darkness. They were lean and desperate, shadows moving against the white landscape. A normal dog might have barked, a frantic, loud display. But I was not a normal dog, and this was not a normal night. Energy was a resource more precious than gold. I rose slowly from Jake's body, planting my forepaws firmly over him. I did not bark. I let a growl begin deep in my chest, a low, vibrating rumble that was more terrifying than any shout. It was the sound of absolute, unconditional warning. It said, "This one is mine. He is protected. Come closer, and you will learn what a promise looks like when it is given teeth." I bared my teeth, the cold air stinging my gums. The growl never stopped. It was the only sound in the world besides the wind. We were locked in a silent standoff, a battle of wills played out across a frozen stage. The glowing eyes watched me, calculating. They could see Jake was helpless, but they could also see that I was not. After a long, tense moment that stretched for an eternity, one pair of eyes blinked and turned away. The other followed. They vanished back into the swirling snow as silently as they had appeared. I had won. I had held the line. I sank back down onto Jake's chest, my body trembling with adrenaline and cold, and resumed my vigil. The darkest time was just before the dawn. The storm was at its peak, a blizzard of blinding white fury. The world had been reduced to nothing but the howling wind and the suffocating presence of the cold. I was so tired. My own body temperature was dropping, my movements becoming sluggish. The pain in my paw was a sharp, angry fire. I laid my head down on Jake's still chest, and for the first time, a true and profound despair washed over me. His breathing was so shallow now, I could barely detect it. The cold had won. We were going to die here, together, buried and forgotten under the snow. A whimper escaped my throat, a sound of pure animal grief. It was the sound of giving up. But as the sound faded, something else rose up in its place. It was the memory of his hand on my head, the sound of his quiet laughter, the silent promise, and a surge of something hot and fierce burned through the cold and the despair. It was love. It was duty. It was rage. Rage against the storm, against the cold, against the silence. I would not let him go. I lifted my head and began my work again. I nudged his face with my cold nose, harder this time. I licked his icy cheek, trying to bring some friction, some life, back to the skin. I pushed my head under his limp hand, trying to get him to close it around me, to make some sign that he was still in there. I whined, but this time it wasn't a sound of despair. It was a call, a demand. "Wake up, Jake. Stay with me. Do not leave me." I repeated these actions over and over, a desperate ritual against the encroaching void. Nudge, lick, push, whine. It was a prayer made of action, a declaration of faith in the face of absolute hopelessness. I would not stop. I would stay awake. I would keep him warm. I would guard him. I would do it until my own heart stopped beating. That was my promise. In the heart of the storm, amidst the crushing despair and the biting cold, loyalty wasn't a thought. It was a heartbeat. It was a breath. It was a desperate, fragile warmth against the encroaching ice. Love is not what you say. It is what you do when there is nothing left to be done. But even the longest night, the darkest and coldest of nights, must eventually face the dawn. And with the first faint hint of gray light on the horizon came a different kind of hope. If you have a pet who is your guardian angel, who has stood by you through your own darkest night, write their name in the comments below. Let's honor these incredible souls together. Just when I thought we were alone, lost in the endless white silence of the storm, I heard it. It wasn't a sound from the forest, not the snap of a twig or the howl of the wind. It was a sound that didn't belong, a rhythmic crunching, faint at first, fighting its way through the blizzard's roar. A sound of purpose, the sound of boots on snow. I lifted my head from Jake's chest, every muscle in my body instantly rigid. My exhaustion was a heavy weight, but the instinct to protect was heavier still. I rose stiffly, the fire in my injured paw screaming in protest, and planted myself over Jake's body, a weary but unwavering sentinel. I faced the direction of the sound, peering into the swirling curtain of white, and my growl returned. It was not the powerful, threatening rumble from the night before. It was ragged, exhausted, the last weapon of a soldier who had nothing left but his will to fight. A figure emerged from the snow, a dark shape in a gray world, slowly taking form. My heart hammered. Was it the one who had watched us from the woods? Had the monster returned to finish what the storm had started? The figure moved closer, and my growl deepened, a desperate warning to stay back. I would not let anyone touch him. But then the wind shifted, and it carried a gift, a scent. It wasn't the cold, predatory scent from the trail. This was familiar. It smelled of pine smoke from a cabin chimney, of strong coffee, and of the unique, kind presence that was Maggie Callahan. At the same time, her voice cut through the wind, calm and steady, a beacon in the chaos. "Easy, Scout. Easy, boy. It's me. It's Maggie." My name. She said my name. The sound of it, spoken with such gentleness, was like a key turning a lock deep inside me. The growl caught in my throat, faltering, and then broke, transforming into a soft, questioning whimper. The rigid tension in my body began to melt away, replaced by a wave of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for what felt like a lifetime. A fragile, trembling hope. I took a single step back from Jake's body, a gesture of trust. My tail, which had been a stiff rudder of aggression, gave one uncertain thump against the snow. My guard was down. I was no longer the only one on duty. Maggie moved forward slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. She understood. She knew she was entering a sacred space, and she showed it the respect it deserved. She didn't rush. She knelt in the snow a few feet away from us, her movements calm and deliberate. "Good boy, Scout," she whispered, her voice full of a warmth that fought back the cold. "You did so good. You saved him." She crawled closer, and I allowed it. I watched as she gently brushed the snow from Jake's face, her gloved fingers moving with a tender precision. She placed 2 fingers on the side of his neck, searching. The world seemed to hold its breath in that single, agonizing moment. I watched her face, my own heart seeming to pause, waiting for her verdict. Then her shoulders, which had been tense with dread, sagged in relief. A shaky breath escaped her lips, visible in the frigid air. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "He's alive. He's alive, Scout." Hearing her say it, hearing the confirmation, was like the sun breaking through the clouds. The immense weight of responsibility that I had carried alone through the longest night began to lift. A wave of exhaustion so profound it almost buckled my legs washed over me. But my duty wasn't over yet. Soon another figure appeared, another member of her team, and together they worked with a quiet, professional efficiency. They spoke in low tones, their words clipped and focused as they assessed Jake's condition and carefully prepared him for transport. They were gentle, treating him not just as a patient, but as a friend. As they lifted him onto the rescue sled, I stayed as close as I could, my body a constant, reassuring presence at his side. I walked alongside the sled as they began the arduous journey back up the treacherous slope of the ravine, my head held high, my eyes constantly scanning the trees. The shadows were no longer welcome here. Hope had arrived, and it wore a bright orange search and rescue jacket. The journey was a blur of motion and singular focus. I ignored the throbbing pain in my paw. I ignored the bone-deep weariness that begged me to lie down. My only mission was to see him to safety. When we finally reached the rescue vehicle, its flashing lights a brilliant, beautiful sight against the snow, I watched as they carefully loaded him inside. Only then, when the doors were closed and the engine was running, a bubble of warmth and safety in the vast, cold wilderness, did I allow myself to feel the true extent of my exhaustion. My job as his guardian in the wild was done. Maggie opened the side door for me, and I leaped in without hesitation, curling up on the floor beside the stretcher, finally letting my weary body rest. I laid my head down, my eyes never leaving Jake's still face, my silent promise still in effect. I would not leave his side until I saw his own eyes open again. Hope isn't always a grand arrival, a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. Sometimes it's just a familiar voice cutting through the silence, a gentle hand in the darkness. Kindness is the one language that even the deepest, most unforgiving winter can understand. They had saved his body from the cold, but I knew as I listened to the steady hum of the engine carrying us away from that terrible place, that a different kind of fight was just beginning. Now we had to save the truth. Who was the Maggie in your life when you needed help the most? Who showed up when you thought you were all alone? Share a tribute to them in the comments. The first few days after the rescue were a blur of confusing sounds and smells. The medical center was a place of sharp, sterile scents that burned my nose, and the constant rhythmic beeping of machines that became a kind of torturous clock, counting the seconds Jake was away from me. Maggie would visit, bringing me food and water, her voice a comforting murmur, but she couldn't give me the one thing I needed. I spent most of my time lying by the door of the station's small office, waiting for the scent of my human, whole and safe. The day he finally came back, the world regained its color. He wasn't the same. He walked slowly, his body a map of purple bruises and white bandages, but his eyes, when they met mine, held a new kind of light, a profound understanding that hadn't been there before. The ride back to our cabin was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the heavy silence of sorrow, but a peaceful, grateful silence. That night is a memory I will carry forever. The storm had passed, leaving the world pristine and silent under a blanket of deep snow. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering golden shadows on the cedar walls of our home. The air smelled of wood smoke, pine, and safety. Jake was sitting in his old armchair, a thick blanket over his lap, his gaze lost in the dancing flames. He was home. He was warm. He was alive. I rose from my spot on the rug and walked over to him, my own limp now just a slight, tender ache. I didn't nudge him or whine. I simply stood beside his chair, my presence a quiet question. He turned his head slowly, and the look he gave me was one that human words will never be able to capture. It was a look of awe, of wonder, of a gratitude so deep it was humbling. He patted his knee, a gentle invitation. I rested my head on his lap, my whole body sighing in contentment. His hand came to rest on my head, and his touch was different. It wasn't the casual, affectionate pat of a man to his dog. It was the deliberate, reverent touch of a soul acknowledging its savior. His fingers were gentle, tracing the shape of my skull, stroking my ears, communicating a thank you so profound it vibrated through his very skin. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Through all of that, you stayed. You good boy. My good boy. You stayed." And in that moment, I understood. He knew. He understood the long night, the cold, the vigil. He understood the promise we had made to each other without ever speaking a word. In that quiet cabin surrounded by the sleeping forest, our bond was reforged, no longer just a connection of partnership, but a sacred covenant sealed in the heart of a winter storm. The story you see wasn't really about the fall. It wasn't about the storm or the conspiracy we would later help uncover or the darkness that men try to hide in the woods. Those are just the details, the setting on the stage. The real story, the one that matters, happened in the silence. It happened in the space between my heartbeat and his. It was about a promise made in the quiet moments of an ordinary life, and a promise kept in the desperate moments of an extraordinary one. It's a testament to a loyalty that asks for nothing in return, a love that doesn't measure cost. It doesn't fade when things get hard. It burns brighter. It becomes the last flickering flame in a world gone dark, a stubborn refusal to let the cold win. That loyalty is a force of nature all its own, as powerful as any blizzard, as enduring as the mountains themselves. And this is a truth that belongs to all of us. Think about your own life. Think about the storms you have faced, the ravines you have fallen into, the moments you felt lost in the cold, convinced you were utterly alone. Who was your warmth in that winter? Who was the guardian who stood over you when you had fallen, refusing to let the shadows claim you? Your scout may not have four paws and a wet nose. Maybe they have the warm hands of a friend who refused to leave your side. Maybe they have the steady voice of a parent who always believed in you, even when you had stopped believing in yourself. Maybe it's the fierce love of a partner, or the innocent faith of a child. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a strength you found deep inside your own heart, a stubborn, resilient part of your own soul that whispered, "Not today," and fought to see the dawn. That is the miracle, not the absence of storms, but the presence of a love that helps us endure them. That is the light we must cherish. If this story has reminded you of the guardian in your own life, I ask you to share it. Share it with someone who might be feeling lost in their own storm right now. Someone who needs a reminder that they are loved, that they are protected, and that they are never, ever truly alone. And if this story touched your heart, if you felt that warmth, let us know by typing "Scout is a hero" in the comments below. It helps us feel the connection with all of you and know we are on the right path. It would mean the world to us if you also hit that like button and subscribe to join our pack. That way you won't miss the next story we have to share from the heart. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.